his leadership. He will remain in office until the Liberal Party picks a new leader. Trudeau came to power in 2015, but the last few years of his leadership were filled with political turmoil, both domestically and abroad. His relationship with India deteriorated after he alleged India's involvement in the assassination of a prominent Khalistani separatist leader. Both nations expelled their top diplomats. Incoming US President Donald Trump threatened to impose 25% tariffs on all Canadian goods if the country did not stem the flow of migrants and fentanyl into the United States. Trudeau also became unpopular among voters due to rising costs of food, housing and his immigration policies. Many Liberal Party leaders publicly called for his resignation after polls showed that Liberals may lose to Conservatives in the next election. So what next for Canada and Canada-India ties? To discuss this, I'm now joined by Vikas Swarup, former High Commissioner of India to Canada. Ambassador Swarup, thank you very much for joining us. What do you think was the final nail in the coffin for Justin Trudeau?
I think the final nail in the coffin was the revolt by his entire caucus. The Atlantic caucus, the Quebec caucus, and the Ontario caucus, they all revolted against Trudeau after the resignation of Chrystia Freeland in the middle of December. And I think then the writing on the wall was very clear. Since he did not enjoy the support of the majority of his parliamentarians, it was completely untenable for him to continue as the Liberal Party leader and as the Prime Minister of Canada.
Ambassador Swarup, if we were to ask you about the other contenders within the Liberal Party, there are 4 or 5 cabinet colleagues of Justin Trudeau who are possible contenders to lead the party in the next election. Who do you think could be the front runner in the pack, and how would the relationship between the Liberal Party in Canada and India be going forward?
So the first point I want to make is that the relationship between India and Canada deteriorated entirely because of Justin Trudeau. And if you look at the statements that were made by the Ministry of External Affairs, they clearly laid the blame entirely on Prime Minister Trudeau, naming him actually in a diplomatic communication, which is rather unprecedented. So the fight between India and Canada was never between India and Canada, it was between India and Prime Minister Trudeau. Now that Prime Minister Trudeau is on the verge of relinquishing office, there would be a change in, let's say, optics at least, if not the substance, because as long as the Liberal Party remains in power, I suppose they will continue to follow the same policies, vis-a-vis India that Justin Trudeau did. But once the Liberal Party is booted out of power, and is very likely in the next election, if the present opinion polls are to hold, then I think we will see a fundamental and substantive change in India-Canada ties. So you asked the question about who are the front runners. Well, as per the reports that we have all read in the newspapers, the front runners are Chrystia Freeland, the former finance minister, who, as you know, resigned in protest over Trudeau's moves to distribute largesse, which he thought was profligate spending. Then there is François-Philippe Champagne, another current minister. There is Dominique Leblanc, who's the closest confidant of Prime Minister Trudeau and is the current finance minister. Another dark horse being named is Anita Anand, who's, as you know, is the Indian origin person in the Trudeau cabinet. But my sense is that if anybody who's associated with the Liberal Party takes over the reins, it will be pretty much, the same thing, and it will not really reap any electoral dividends to the Liberal Party. Only if they bring in a complete outsider. And one person who's rumored to be wanting to throw his hat into the ring is Mark Carney. He's a respected economist. He is the former governor of the Bank of England and also of the Bank of Canada. And if he puts his hat into the ring, then there might be a slight bump for the Liberals. But look, my sense is this is a poison chalice. Everybody knows whoever is the next Liberal leader will probably just have a month or so as Prime Minister, because elections will be called when a no-confidence motion is introduced, which means that the new Liberal Party leader will have less than a month to prove himself or herself to the Canadian electorate. And I don't think it will have too much of an impact on the results of the overall general election as and when it is held.
What about 45-year-old Pierre Poilievre, the key Conservative leader? According to several polls, he is the frontrunner who could be the next Prime Minister. In fact, his approval ratings are as high as 90%.
Absolutely. I think, you see, one of the reasons why Trudeau was able to continue for so long was that he was not liked, but the Canadian electorate did not like the Conservatives any better. And in fact, the Conservatives, the choices that they had made in terms of choosing the leaders were people who were not really enthused. The Canadians were not really enthused by them. But in Pierre Poilievre, I think they have found a real leader who was able to rally a majority of Canadians to his cause. He came into prominence after the truckers' convoy. And since then, his promises of cutting down taxes, of raising funds to provide Canadians with decent housing, and on cutting down immigration, I think have resonated with Canadian voters. And as of now, as you have rightly said, he's running pretty high in the polls. And if those polls continue to hold, he is going to be the next Prime Minister of Canada.
Ambassador Swarup, do you get a sense that India will have a chance to start things afresh with the new government in Canada, considering under Trudeau, and as you rightly said, our ties with Canada hit a complete rock bottom, the worst in decades, because of Justin Trudeau's policies and approach to India. Do you expect things to start afresh with the new government?
Absolutely. Look, we have always maintained that Canada is too important a country for us not to have good relations with it. It is a member of the G7. It is the third largest, energy superpower in the world, has the third largest oil reserves after Venezuela and Saudi Arabia. And of course, we share common parliamentary traditions and liberal democracy. So there are all the more reasons not to discount the fact that, almost 2 million people of Indian origin have made Canada their home. All these reasons are there for us to have a good relationship with Canada. Unfortunately, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, for his personal political ends, torpedoed the entire relationship. And that is why my sense is that when the Conservatives come to power, then Pierre Poilievre would want to show that, Trudeau destroyed the relationship with India and he's going to rebuild it. And there are plenty of low-hanging fruit. For instance, the high commissioners could be restored on both sides. The diplomats could be restored on both sides. And the court case relating to Hardeep Singh Nijjar could continue. But as we have seen with America, the court case is continuing, the judicial process is continuing, but cooperation between India and America is proceeding at a very fast pace. In fact, the National Security Advisor, Jake Sullivan, is in Delhi as we conduct this interview.
Right. Do you get a sense that the assassination of Hardeep Singh Nijjar and the allegations made by the Trudeau government against India for its involvement in the killing will be a major factor in the election? Will that be a poll plank? And how strongly will the Khalistani sentiment impact the outcome of the election?
No. First of all, Khalistanis account for only 2% of the Canadian Sikh population. So they are not a factor at all. Yes, the Sikh vote does matter because out of 338 ridings in Canada, or constituencies as we call them here, the Sikh vote is either the majority vote or the swing vote in about 18 to 20 constituencies. So yes, the Sikh vote is important. But look, this election is not going to be fought on Canadian foreign policy. This election is being fought mainly on Canadian domestic policy, the cost of living crisis, the housing crisis, and the broken consensus on immigration. Plus, let's not discount the Trump factor. Trump is now going to be the president of America, and he does not enjoy a good relationship with Justin Trudeau at all. He refers to him derisively as Governor Trudeau. He calls Canada, he's inviting Canada to become the 51st state of America. So under Justin Trudeau, the relationship with USA is definitely not going to go along well. And they have to have a new leader who can negotiate with Trump from a position of strength. But the election will be fought mainly on domestic issues and on the Trump factor.
Right. And finally, sir, do you think India will be able to restart negotiations on a free trade agreement with Canada, which had been paused under the Trudeau administration? When do you think the time would be ripe to do so? And what will be the point when India will say, let's start again?
I think it's for Canada to say, let's start again, because it was Canada that decided to suspend those trade negotiations. So my sense is that as soon as the Conservatives come to power, this will be one of their first steps in trying to rebuild the relationship with India, to restart the trade negotiations on the, on the investment treaty and on the trade treaty. And let's not forget, Canadian pension funds have invested close to $80 billion in India already. And they would be looking forward to a signal from the government that it is good to invest in India, it is safe to continue our investment, and that India and Canada can resolve their political differences and move along on other fronts.
All right, Ambassador Swarup, thank you so much for speaking to us here on CNBC TV 18, giving us your view on India-Canada ties going forward and how they can be better with the new government in power in Canada. Thanks once again for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so that was our segment on India-Canada relations. On that note, we take a short break. Don't go anywhere. When we return, we will be discussing the Delhi elections.